He stood frozen in the bustling airport terminal, unable to move or breathe. The world around Thomas Chen slowed to a crawl as his eyes fixed on a woman waiting by the coffee shop across the hall. Her long dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and even from this distance, he recognized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, a gesture so achingly familiar it sent a jolt through his body. It couldn't be her. It was impossible. Thomas blinked hard, certain his mind was playing cruel tricks. He'd been traveling for nearly 20 hours, flying from Tokyo back to Los Angeles after wrapping his latest film. Exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. That had to be the explanation. Sleep deprivation and grief were powerful distorters of reality. 5 years had passed since the accident that took Lily from his life. 5 years of learning to live with the hollow space she'd left behind. 5 years of throwing himself into his work, building his career as an actor while trying to outrun memories that followed him everywhere. "Sir, are you all right?" An airport staff member touched his elbow gently, concern etched on her face. Thomas realized he'd been standing motionless in the middle of the walkway, his carry-on bag forgotten at his feet. "Yes, sorry," he mumbled, picking up his bag while keeping his eyes fixed on the woman. She hadn't noticed him yet. Her attention focused on her phone as she sipped her coffee. The logical part of his brain insisted this was a coincidence, a random woman who bore a striking resemblance to someone he once loved. Los Angeles was full of beautiful women with long dark hair, but logic couldn't explain the trembling in his hands or the painful thudding of his heart. "Would you like to sit down? You look pale," the staff member offered, but Thomas shook his head. "I'm fine, thank you," he replied, summoning a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. His fame usually made it difficult to move through airports unnoticed, but his baseball cap and sunglasses provided some anonymity, and most travelers were too focused on their own journeys to pay him much attention. He needed to see her face properly. Thomas moved toward the coffee shop, drawn by an invisible thread. His feet carried him forward while his mind raced with possibilities and impossibilities. The woman looked up from her phone, scanning the crowd as if waiting for someone. Thomas stopped breathing. Her profile, the straight nose, the curve of her cheek, the shape of her lips was hauntingly similar to Lily's. But when she turned slightly, he caught differences too, a slightly sharper chin, a different arch to her eyebrows. Not Lily, of course not. The crushing weight of disappointment surprised him. Had some small, irrational part of him actually believed he'd found her, that somehow, against all odds and logic, Lily hadn't died in that car crash 5 years ago? Thomas turned away, embarrassed by his own reaction. He should know better by now. The first year after Lily's death had been filled with these moments, catching glimpses of women who resembled her in crowds, on streets, in restaurants. Each time his heart would leap before reality crashed down again. Those incidents had gradually faded as time passed, but apparently they hadn't disappeared entirely. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His assistant, Vanessa, checking to make sure he'd landed safely. "Just touched down," he texted back. "Heading to baggage claim now." He slipped the phone back in his pocket and forced himself to walk toward the escalators that would take him to the baggage claim area. It was time to go home, to his empty house in the Hollywood Hills, to the life he'd built without Lily. A good life, successful by any measure, but still missing something essential. As he rode the escalator down, Thomas glanced back toward the coffee shop. The woman was gone. He nearly convinced himself he had imagined her entirely until he reached baggage claim and heard someone call out behind him. "Excuse me?" Thomas turned, and there she was, the woman from the coffee shop standing just a few feet away. Up close, the resemblance to Lily was even more striking, yet also more obviously incomplete. Her eyes were brown instead of green, her face slightly rounder, but the way she held herself, the slight tilt of her head as she looked at him, these things were uncanny echoes of Lily. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said with a smile that transformed her face. "But aren't you Thomas Chen? I thought I recognized you upstairs, but I wasn't sure." "Just a fan, nothing more." Thomas felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. "Yes, that's me," he replied, summoning his public persona, the charming, approachable actor his fans expected. "I loved you in Beyond the Horizon," she said. "That scene where you're standing on the cliff. It was beautiful." "Thank you," he said, the words automatic after years of similar exchanges. "That's very kind." "I'm Alex," she said, offering her hand. "Alex Rivera." Thomas shook her hand, noting how different it felt from Lily's. "Nice to meet you, Alex." "I don't usually do this," she continued, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "Approach celebrities, I mean. But you looked, I don't know, sad up by the coffee shop. I just wanted to say that your work has meant a lot to me." Thomas felt a surge of guilt. Had she noticed him staring at her? Did she think he'd been watching her because he was interested, rather than because she resembled his dead girlfriend? "That means a lot," he said sincerely. "Sometimes it's hard to know if what we do actually matters to people." The baggage carousel began to move, drawing their attention. "Well, I should let you get your bags," Alex said, taking a step back. "It was nice meeting you, Thomas." "You too," he replied, watching as she turned and walked toward another carousel. Thomas spotted his suitcase and moved to retrieve it, his mind still caught between past and present. As he pulled the bag from the carousel, a memory surfaced. His first trip with Lily, her laughter as they struggled with too much luggage for a weekend getaway. The pain of the memory had dulled over the years, but it hadn't disappeared. He glanced in Alex's direction again, unable to help himself. She was pulling her own suitcase from the carousel now, seemingly unaware of his attention. There was something about her that went beyond the physical resemblance to Lily, a quality he couldn't quite name. Thomas wheeled his suitcase toward the exit, toward the driver who would be waiting to take him home. He should leave, forget this strange encounter, and get some much-needed rest. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, he found himself veering in Alex's direction. "Alex?" he called, surprised by his own actions. She turned, eyebrows raised in question. "This is going to sound strange," Thomas said, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "But would you like to get coffee sometime?" Her surprise was evident, but she didn't immediately reject the idea. "That does sound strange," she agreed with a small smile. "Especially since we just met at an airport." "I know," Thomas admitted. "But sometimes life is strange." Alex studied him for a moment as if trying to determine his sincerity. "Okay," she said finally. "Coffee could be nice." They exchanged phone numbers, and Thomas promised to call the following day. As he finally headed for the exit, he felt a confusing mixture of emotions: guilt, hope, anxiety, and something that felt dangerously like anticipation. What was he doing? Was he interested in Alex for herself, or just because she reminded him of Lily? Was it fair to either of them to pursue this connection when its foundation was so complicated? Thomas had no answers as he stepped outside into the warm Los Angeles evening. The driver took his bag and opened the car door, and Thomas slid into the back seat, his mind still in the airport with a woman who was and wasn't the love he had lost. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," Thomas replied. Home. But as the car pulled away from the curb, Thomas wondered where home really was. The house in the hills was just a place, beautiful and expensive, but hollow in its emptiness. Home had once been wherever Lily was. Since losing her, he'd been adrift, anchored only by his work and the structure it provided. His phone buzzed with a new message. "Alex, coffee tomorrow at 2. There's a nice place in Venice called Driftwood that's usually quiet." Thomas stared at the message, feeling like he stood at a crossroads. To reply was to step into unknown territory, to risk confusion and pain and possibly more loss. To ignore it was the safer choice. "Works perfectly," he typed back. "I'll see you there." As the city lights blurred past the car windows, Thomas wondered if he was making a terrible mistake or taking the first step toward healing. Perhaps it was both. Either way, for the first time in years, he felt something breaking through the carefully constructed routine of his life, a crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. For tonight, it was enough to feel something new. Thomas arrived at Driftwood 20 minutes early. The coffee shop was tucked away on a quiet street in Venice, far enough from the tourist spots to offer some privacy. He chose a table in the corner with a view of both the entrance and the beach beyond the large windows. Old habits from years of navigating public spaces as his fame grew. He ordered a black coffee and tried to quiet the doubts that had kept him awake most of the night. What was he doing here? Meeting a stranger because she reminded him of Lily seemed unfair to everyone involved. Yet something beyond the physical resemblance had drawn him to Alex, something he couldn't quite explain. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened and Alex walked in. Today she wore her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, highlighting the differences between her and Lily more clearly. She wore simple jeans and a light blue blouse, casual but put together. Thomas raised his hand in greeting and her face lit up with a smile as she spotted him. "You actually came," she said as she reached his table. "I half expected your assistant to call and cancel." Thomas laughed. "I considered it," he admitted. "But I wanted to be here." Alex ordered a cappuccino and settled across from him. In the daylight, he could see her eyes weren't just brown. They were amber with flecks of gold near the pupils. Nothing like Lily's deep green eyes. The realization brought both relief and confusion. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug when it arrived. "This is weird, right? Meeting like this?" "Definitely weird," Thomas agreed, appreciating her directness. "But good weird, I think. Can I ask you something?" Her head tilted slightly, another gesture that reminded him of Lily. "Why did you ask me for coffee? You looked at me so strangely at the airport, like you'd seen a ghost." The question caught him off guard. He hadn't expected such straightforwardness, had prepared vague explanations and deflections. But faced with her honest curiosity, lies felt wrong. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, watching her reaction carefully. "Someone I lost." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Oh." She took a sip of her cappuccino, considering his words. "I'm sorry. That must have been jarring for you." "It was," Thomas admitted. "Is that too weird? That I asked you out because you reminded me of someone else?" Alex thought for a moment. "It's definitely unusual," she said. "But life is unusual sometimes. And I'm sitting here because I wanted to meet the man whose films helped me through some dark times, so maybe we're even." "Dark times?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. "My brother died 3 years ago," Alex said, her voice softening. "He loved your movies. We used to watch them together whenever I visited him in the hospital. Especially Beyond the Horizon. We must have seen it a dozen times. After he was gone, I kept watching your films. They became a connection to him in a strange way." "I'm sorry about your brother," Thomas said, feeling a new connection forming between them, one built on shared understanding of loss. "Thank you." She looked out at the ocean for a moment. "It gets easier, but it never goes away completely. The missing them part, no, it doesn't," Thomas agreed quietly. They fell into conversation about lighter topics: her work as a photographer, his recent film in Tokyo, places they'd traveled, books they'd read. Thomas found himself laughing more than he had in months. There was an ease between them that surprised him. "So who was she?" Alex asked eventually. "The person I remind you of?" Thomas tensed slightly but found he wanted to answer. "Her name was Lily. We were together for 4 years. She died in a car accident 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Alex said simply. "It happened on a rainy night. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, crossed the center line." Thomas rarely talked about the accident, but the words came out surprisingly easily. "I wasn't with her. I was in New Zealand filming. I didn't even get to say goodbye." Alex reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort, not romance. "That's awful. For a long time I kept seeing her everywhere," Thomas continued. "In crowds, on streets. My mind playing tricks, I guess. It happened less over the years, until yesterday at the airport. And there I was, looking like a ghost from your past." Alex said softly, "I understand why you looked so shaken now." "You don't look exactly like her," Thomas clarified. "There are similarities but also clear differences, especially now that I'm sitting here with you." "Well, that's somewhat reassuring," Alex said with a small smile. "I'd hate to be just a replacement for someone else." The comment hung in the air between them. Was that what he was looking for? Thomas wasn't sure himself. "I should be honest," he said after a moment. "I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know if I asked you for coffee because you remind me of Lily or because I felt a connection that goes beyond that. But I do know I've enjoyed talking with you more than I've enjoyed talking with anyone in a long time." Alex studied him, her amber eyes thoughtful. "Honesty works for me," she said finally. "And for what it's worth, I've enjoyed talking with you too. The real you, not the movie star version." They stayed at Driftwood for nearly 3 hours, long after their coffee had gone cold. Thomas learned that Alex had grown up in Seattle, had studied photography in college, and now worked freelance for several travel magazines. She'd been in Japan on assignment, the same country he'd just left, photographing traditional crafts and their makers. Look, she said, pulling out her phone and showing him a photo of an elderly man crafting a wooden bowl with incredible precision. This is Tanaka-san. He's been making these bowls for 60 years. His hands were like maps of his life. Thomas looked at the image, beautifully composed, intimate without being intrusive. You're very good, he said, genuinely impressed. You capture something beyond just the person. That's the goal, Alex replied, pleased by his understanding. To show the humanity, not just the subject. When they finally left the coffee shop, the afternoon was fading into evening. They walked along the beach, shoes in hand, letting the cool water wash over their feet. It felt strangely normal, despite the occasional double-take from passers-by who recognized Thomas. Does that ever get old? Alex asked after a group of teenagers whispered and pointed in their direction. Being recognized everywhere you go? Yes and no, Thomas replied honestly. I'm grateful for my career, but sometimes I miss anonymity. He glanced at her. This is nice, though. Just walking and talking. It is, she agreed. They reached a pier and stopped, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. I have to fly to Colorado tomorrow, Alex said, breaking the comfortable silence. Another assignment. I'll be gone for 2 weeks. Oh, Thomas said, surprised by the disappointment he felt. That's soon. It is, she agreed. Then, I'd like to see you again when I get back. If you want to. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. In the golden light of the setting sun, any resemblance to Lily seemed less important than the person standing before him. Alex was her own person. Kind, talented, carrying her own griefs and joys. Getting to know her would be its own journey, not a revisiting of the past. I'd like that, he said. They exchanged a slightly awkward hug goodbye, neither quite sure where they stood. As Thomas watched Alex walk back toward the street, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. Hope, fear, guilt, anticipation. His phone rang. It was Vanessa, his assistant. Thomas, I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. The director for Shadows of Yesterday wants to meet tomorrow to discuss your character, and the studio executives want to finalize the contract for the new project. Reality rushing back in, his carefully scheduled life resuming. Sorry, I was out with a friend, he said, still watching Alex's retreating figure. A friend? Vanessa sounded surprised. Thomas rarely socialized outside his close circle these days. Yes, he said, a new friend. He wasn't sure if that was the right word, but it felt closer to the truth than anything else. As he turned to head back to his car, Thomas realized something had shifted inside him. The grief for Lily would always be there, a quiet, constant companion, but perhaps there was room for something else alongside it. Not a replacement, but a new chapter. For the first time in years, Thomas found himself looking forward to an uncertain future. The 2 weeks that followed were the busiest Thomas had experienced in months. The studio had accelerated the timeline for his next film, Shadows of Yesterday, moving the shooting schedule up by 3 weeks. Thomas threw himself into preparation, meeting with the director, rehearsing with co-stars, training with stunt coordinators for the film's action sequences. The physical demands of the role were a welcome distraction from the confusion in his personal life. He hadn't expected to think about Alex as much as he did. Random moments throughout his days triggered thoughts of her. Seeing a photographer on set, hearing someone mention Colorado, catching the scent of coffee like the kind they'd shared at Driftwood. Each time he'd feel a strange mixture of anticipation and guilt. You seem different, remarked Nicole, his co-star, during a break in rehearsals. More present, it suits you. Thomas gave a non-committal shrug. Just focused on the work. Nicole had known him for years, having worked together on 2 previous films. She knew about Lily, about the grief that had hollowed him out and the walls he'd built since. If you say so, she said with a knowing smile. 7 days into Alex's trip, she sent him a photo, a stunning mountain landscape at sunrise, mist curling through pine trees, peaks tinged gold and rose in the distance. No message accompanied it, just the image. Thomas studied it for a long time, appreciating not just the beauty of the scene but the skill with which she'd captured it. He saved the image and sent back a simple response. Beautiful. 3 more photos arrived over the following days. An alpine lake reflecting perfect blue sky, an elderly rancher with a weathered face full of character, and a small-town diner at night. its neon sign casting colorful reflections on a rain-slicked street. Each one revealed Alex's eye for composition, for finding beauty in both the grand and the ordinary. Thomas found himself looking forward to these visual messages. They required no response beyond simple appreciation, created no pressure or expectations, yet maintained a connection between them. On the 12th day, his phone rang while he was reviewing script changes in his trailer. Alex's name appeared on the screen. Thomas hesitated only briefly before answering. "Hey," he said, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "Hey, yourself," Alex replied. In the background, he could hear the sounds of a busy cafe. "Is this a bad time?" "No, just reviewing some script changes." "Everything okay?" "Everything's great," she said. "I just wanted to hear your voice, I guess." "Is that weird?" Thomas smiled, grateful she couldn't see the effect her words had on him. "Not weird. Nice, actually. How's the famous actor life treating you?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. "Hectic." They moved up the schedule for the new film. "I've been practically living at the studio." "Sounds exhausting." "It is," Thomas admitted, "but good exhausting. Keeps me out of my head." He paused, then asked, "How's Colorado?" "Gorgeous." "The light here is a photographer's dream." Her enthusiasm was palpable even through the phone. "I've been working with this old ranching family documenting their way of life. 3 generations living and working together. It makes me think about what really matters, you know?" Thomas did know. Success and fame had given him many things, but not the things that truly sustained a person. Connection, purpose beyond oneself. The sense of belonging somewhere. "I get that," he said softly. They talked for nearly an hour, about everything and nothing. Her work, his film, books they'd both read, places they wanted to visit. The conversation flowed easily, without awkward pauses or forced topics. When they finally hung up, Thomas sat staring at the script in front of him, unable to focus on the words. Something was happening, something he hadn't planned for or expected. The next night, unable to sleep, Thomas found himself doing something he'd avoided for years, looking at old photos of Lily. They were stored in a password-protected folder on his laptop. Images he couldn't bring himself to delete but rarely had the courage to view. Lily smiling on a beach in Maui. Lily concentrating on a crossword puzzle at their kitchen table. Lily laughing in the snow during a trip to Lake Tahoe. Each image was a reminder of what he'd lost, but tonight, the pain felt different, still present but less consuming. He closed the laptop and walked to the window of his bedroom, looking out at the lights of Los Angeles spread below his hillside home. For so long he'd been caught in a strange limbo, not fully living in the present, unable to let go of the past. Meeting Alex had disturbed that stasis, forcing him to confront questions he'd been avoiding. Was he betraying Lily's memory by feeling something for someone else? Or was he betraying himself by refusing to open his heart again? There were no easy answers, but for the first time, Thomas felt ready to at least consider the questions. 2 days before Alex was due to return, Thomas received another call, this one from his agent. "Frank, great news," Frank announced without preamble. "That Martin Scorsese project we've been chasing? They want you for the lead." "This is big, Thomas. Career-defining big. That's..." "Wow," Thomas said, genuinely surprised. He'd been pursuing this role for months, never really believing he'd get it. "The only catch," Frank continued, "is the timeline. They start shooting in New Zealand next month. It's a 6-month commitment minimum." New Zealand, where he'd been when Lily died. The coincidence wasn't lost on Thomas. "I need to think about it," he said, ignoring Frank's immediate protests. "Just give me a couple of days." After hanging up, Thomas sat on his deck watching the sunset and turning the decision over in his mind. A year ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. Work had been his refuge, his purpose, the thing that kept him functioning when grief threatened to pull him under. Now the prospect of leaving Los Angeles, leaving before whatever was beginning with Alex had a chance to develop, filled him with unexpected reluctance. When the day of Alex's return finally arrived, Thomas felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced in years. They'd arranged to meet at a small restaurant near the beach, a place known for its privacy and discretion. Thomas arrived early again, choosing a table on the outdoor patio with a view of the ocean. He spotted her the moment she walked in, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple green dress that caught the late afternoon light. She looked tired but happy, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You're still here," she said as she sat down across from him. "Part of me wondered if you'd have changed your mind." "I'm still here," Thomas confirmed with a small smile. "How was the flight?" "Long, worth it, though." She studied his face. "You look like you have something on your mind." Thomas had always appreciated her directness, her ability to see past the polished exterior he presented to most of the world. "I got offered a role," he said. "A big one. The kind actors dream about." "That's wonderful," Alex said, genuine happiness in her voice. "Congratulations. It films in New Zealand. For 6 months starting next month." "Oh." Her expression shifted slightly, a flash of disappointment quickly masked. "Well, that's still amazing. An opportunity you can't pass up." "That's what my agent said," Thomas agreed. "What everyone would say." Alex tilted her head slightly. "But what do you say?" "I don't know yet." Thomas looked out at the ocean, then back at her. "A year ago I would have said yes without thinking twice. Now I'm not so sure." "Because of me?" Alex asked, her voice careful. "Partly," Thomas admitted. "But also because I'm starting to question whether always saying yes to work is really what I want anymore. For years it was easier to lose myself in characters than to deal with just being me, with all my broken pieces." Alex reached across the table and took his hand, the first time she'd initiated such contact. "We're all broken in some way, Thomas. It's what makes us human." The touch of her hand in his felt right in a way he hadn't expected. Different from Lily's touch, but good in its own way. New, not replacement. "I don't want to make any decisions tonight," he said. "Tonight I just want to hear about Colorado, about the people you photographed, about what you saw that moved you." Alex smiled, understanding in her eyes. "I can do that." As she began to share stories from her trip, showing him photos on her camera, Thomas felt something shift inside him again. A door opening wider to let in more light, more possibility. Whatever choice he made about New Zealand would be made with eyes wide open, not from fear or habit or grief, but from a place of growing clarity about what he truly wanted for his life going forward. And for the first time in 5 years, Thomas realized he was thinking about the future with something that felt remarkably like hope. The following weeks unfolded in a strange bubble of normalcy that felt anything but normal to Thomas. Between his demanding filming schedule for Shadows of Yesterday and Alex's freelance assignments, they managed to carve out moments together, dinners at tucked-away restaurants, early morning walks on nearly empty beaches, quiet evenings at his home in the hills. "You still haven't decided about New Zealand," Alex observed one evening as they sat on his deck, sharing a bottle of wine under a sky scattered with stars. It wasn't a question or a demand, just a gentle acknowledgement of the decision that hung between them. "I told Frank I'd give him an answer by Friday," Thomas replied, watching the city lights twinkle below. 3 days away. Scorsese isn't known for his patience. "It's an incredible opportunity," Alex said, her voice carefully neutral. "The kind that defines careers." Thomas looked at her, appreciating her refusal to influence his decision. She had her own life, her own career, her own path. It was one of the things he admired most about her. "It is," he agreed. "But so is Beyond the Horizon and that film." He paused, remembering the darkest period of his life. "I was filming that when Lily died. In New Zealand," understanding dawned in Alex's eyes. "That's why this decision is harder than it should be." "Partly," Thomas admitted. "Going back there feels like, I don't know, reopening something I've tried hard to close. Or maybe finishing something that never properly ended," Alex suggested gently. Thomas considered her words, turning them over in his mind. He'd left New Zealand abruptly after learning of Lily's death, filming suspended for weeks while he dealt with funeral arrangements and the initial crushing waves of grief. When he'd eventually returned to complete the film, he'd done so like a sleepwalker, performing his scenes with technical precision but emotional detachment. The finished product had been acclaimed, ironically earning him awards for what critics called a performance of raw, devastating emotion. "Maybe," he conceded. "I've never thought of it that way." They fell silent, the night wrapping around them like a familiar blanket. After a while, Alex spoke again. "Can I tell you something without you taking it the wrong way?" "Of course." "Whatever you decide about New Zealand, whether you go or stay, it should be about you. Not about Lily, not about me. About what you truly want for your life now. Her words hit him with unexpected force. For 5 years, his decisions had been reactions. To grief, to pressure, to expectations both external and internal. When had he last made a choice based purely on what he wanted? I'm not sure I remember how to do that, he admitted quietly. Alex's hand found his in the darkness. Maybe it's time to remember. The next day, Thomas did something he'd been avoiding for 5 years. He visited Lily's grave. The cemetery was peaceful in the late afternoon light. Oak trees casting dappled shadows across manicured lawns and granite markers. He brought white roses, her favorite. He stood before the simple headstone, feeling strangely calm. I miss you, he said aloud, his voice sounding loud in the quiet space. I think I always will. But something's changing, Lily. I'm changing. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Not an answer, just the world continuing its eternal cycles. I met someone, he continued. Her name is Alex. She reminds me of you in some ways, but she's entirely her own person. I think you would have liked her. Thomas sat on the grass beside the grave, placing the roses carefully against the stone. I've been offered a role filming in New Zealand, where I was when... He swallowed hard. Part of me is terrified to go back there. But another part thinks maybe it's exactly where I need to go. To face it, to finish what was interrupted. He stayed for nearly an hour, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, feeling a gradual easing of something tight and painful in his chest. No dramatic breakthrough, no sudden resolution. Just the quiet acknowledgement that life continued. Changed but unbroken. When Thomas finally stood to leave, he pressed his fingertips to his lips, then to the top of Lily's headstone. Thank you, he whispered, for everything we had, for teaching me how to love. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace. He walked back to his car, feeling lighter than he had in years. That evening, Thomas called Frank. I'll take the role, he said simply. Send me the contract. Frank's excitement burst through the phone. You won't regret this, Thomas. It's going to be brilliant. We'll negotiate for a private jet, the best accommodations in Wellington. Actually, Thomas interrupted, I want standard accommodations, and I'll fly commercial. What? Why would you? Because I want to experience this differently than last time, Thomas explained, surprising himself with the clarity of his decision. I want to be present for it. After ending the call with a bewildered Frank, Thomas drove to Alex's apartment, a modest place in a quiet neighborhood near the beach. She answered the door in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair piled messily on top of her head, a far cry from the polished celebrities he usually encountered. This is a surprise, she said, stepping back to let him in. Photography equipment was spread across her living room floor, images from her Colorado trip arranged in sequence as she prepared them for her client. I took the role, Thomas said without preamble. I'm going to New Zealand. Alex's expression remained carefully neutral. When do you leave? 3 weeks. He moved closer to her, needing her to understand what he was trying to say. I went to Lily's grave today. For the first time in 5 years, surprise flickered across her face. How was that? Hard, good, necessary. Thomas took a deep breath. I'm going to New Zealand because it's the right choice for my career, but also because I need to face what happened there. I need to finish something that I left unfinished. Alex nodded slowly. I understand. But before I go, Thomas continued, I want to be clear about something. What's happening between us, it matters to me. It's not just because you reminded me of someone from my past. It's because of who you are. The smile that spread across Alex's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. That means a lot to me. I don't know what happens next, Thomas admitted. 6 months is a long time. You have your life, your work. I wouldn't expect you to put anything on hold for me. Let's not make any grand plans or promises, Alex suggested, moving to stand directly in front of him. Let's just agree to stay open to possibilities. Thomas felt a rush of gratitude for her wisdom, her refusal to demand certainties he couldn't provide. I can do that. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Thomas wrapped his scenes for Shadows of Yesterday, met with Scorsese via video call to discuss his character, and spent as much time with Alex as their schedules allowed. They didn't speak of the future beyond his departure date, focusing instead on each moment they shared. The night before his flight, Alex came to his house for dinner. Thomas had arranged for his usual chef to prepare the meal, setting the table on the deck with candles and flowers. They ate and talked and laughed, carefully avoiding the reality of tomorrow's goodbye. After dinner, they walked in his garden, the scent of jasmine heavy in the night air. "I have something for you," Alex said, pulling a small wrapped package from her bag. Thomas unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal. "Open it," she encouraged. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Images Alex had taken of places they'd visited together over the past weeks. The coffee shop where they'd first really talked. The beach where they'd walked. The restaurant where they'd reunited after her Colorado trip. Interspersed with these were quotes, handwritten in elegant script. "It's beautiful," Thomas said, genuinely moved. "Thank you. For the journey," Alex explained. "Something to remind you of here, of now, while you're creating your next chapter." Thomas closed the journal and looked at her. Really looked at her, memorizing the details of her face. The warmth in her amber eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not of going to New Zealand, but of what might happen to this, to us, while I'm gone." Alex placed her hand against his cheek. "Fear is just part of the price of admission for anything worth having, Thomas." He leaned down and kissed her then. A kiss that felt like both a beginning and a temporary ending. Tomorrow he would board a plane for New Zealand, returning to the place where his life had fractured 5 years ago. He didn't know what awaited him there or what he would find when he returned. But for the first time in years, uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like a promise. A reminder that life continued to unfold in ways that couldn't be scripted or controlled, only lived. New Zealand greeted Thomas with familiar beauty that stirred complicated emotions. The snow-capped mountains, the impossibly blue lakes, the endless green hills. It was all as stunning as he remembered, and yet transformed by the weight of what had happened here 5 years ago. He'd rented a small house outside Wellington, instead of staying at the luxury hotel the studio had initially arranged. The place was simple but peaceful, perched on a hillside with views of the harbor. Each morning he would sit on the porch with his coffee, watching the sun rise over the water, thinking about the strange path that had led him back here. Filming began almost immediately. Working with Scorsese was everything Thomas had hoped, challenging, exhausting, inspiring. The role demanded more of him than any previous part, forcing him to dig into emotional depths he'd carefully avoided for years. Some days left him drained, others exhilarated. All of them changed him in small but significant ways. "You're different from what I expected," Scorsese told him after a particularly grueling scene. "There's something raw and honest happening in your work now. Something that wasn't in your earlier films." Thomas nodded, understanding what the director meant. "Life happens," he said simply. At night he would call or text with Alex, sharing details from his day, hearing about her latest photography projects. Sometimes they would video chat, the time difference meaning morning for him and evening for her. Other times, days would pass with just brief messages, both of them busy with work, neither wanting to impose expectations on the other. 2 months into filming, Thomas decided to visit the location where he'd been shooting when he received the news of Lily's accident. It was a remote beach on the South Island, a place of wild, rugged beauty. The production assistant who drove him there seemed puzzled by his request to be left alone for a few hours, but Thomas offered no explanation. He walked along the shore, memories washing over him as relentlessly as the waves against the sand. Here was where he'd stood for the final scene of Beyond the Horizon. Here was where his phone had rung with news that would shatter his world. Here was where he'd fallen to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to comprehend a reality without Lily in it. Thomas sat on the sand and opened Alex's journal, turning the pages slowly, grounding himself in the images she'd created, in the life he was building now. The contrast between then and now struck him forcefully. The same location, the same person, yet everything changed. He took out his phone and called Alex. "Hey," she answered, sounding sleepy. It was midnight in Los Angeles. "Everything okay?" "I'm at the beach," he said. "Where I was when I found out about Lily." Alex was immediately alert. "How are you feeling?" "Sad," Thomas admitted. "But okay." "I wanted you to know where I was, who I was thinking about. Both of us?" Alex asked softly. "Yes." The simple truth of it settled in his chest. "Both of you. They talked for nearly an hour, Thomas describing the beach, the memories, the feelings that arose. Alex listened without judgment or jealousy, offering the simple gift of her presence across thousands of miles. "I wish I could hug you right now," she said finally. "Me too," Thomas replied. "But talking helps." When he hung up, Thomas walked to the water's edge and stood looking out at the endless horizon. "Goodbye," he whispered, not to Lily exactly, but to the grief that had defined him for so long, to the man he'd been in this place 5 years ago. The following months of filming passed with increasing intensity. Thomas poured himself into the role, into the story they were telling. His performance drew praise from cast and crew alike, with whispers of award nominations already circulating. Through it all, his connection with Alex continued, sometimes stronger, sometimes fainter, but never broken. They developed their own rhythm of communication, their own shorthand. She sent him photos of Los Angeles sunsets. He sent her videos of behind-the-scenes moments on set. Neither made demands, yet both remained present in each other's lives. 4 months into filming, Alex surprised him with news. "I got an assignment in Auckland," she told him during their weekly video call. "A series on Maori artisans for National Geographic. I'll be there for 3 weeks." Thomas felt his heart race at the possibility of seeing her. "When? Next month? If you're not too busy with filming, I'll make time," he promised immediately. "I can't believe you'll be here." Alex smiled, her amber eyes crinkling at the corners. "I might have pushed a bit for this particular assignment." The anticipation of her visit carried Thomas through the most challenging stretch of filming. When the day finally arrived, he arranged to pick her up himself from the Auckland airport, waiting at the arrivals gate with an unexpected case of nerves. When Alex appeared among the crowd of travelers, Thomas felt the same jolt of recognition he'd experienced that day in Los Angeles. Only this time, it wasn't because she resembled someone from his past, but because she was herself, a person who had become important to him in her own right. She dropped her bags when she saw him rushing forward into his arms. Thomas held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her presence after months of digital connection. "You're really here," he murmured against her hair. "I'm really here," she confirmed, pulling back to look at him with a wide smile. The 3 weeks that followed were a stolen gift, moments carved out between his filming schedule and her photography assignments. They explored Auckland together, hiked to hidden waterfalls, cooked meals in his rented house, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. On her last evening in New Zealand, they sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. "This changes things, doesn't it?" Alex asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "What does?" "Being together here. In the place that holds so much of your past?" Thomas considered her words. "It does," he agreed. "But in a good way, I think. It feels like, I don't know, like worlds colliding but not crashing. Merging, maybe." "I like that," Alex said. "Merging, not crashing." The next morning, Thomas drove her to the airport, both of them quiet, lost in their thoughts. At the departures area, he helped her with her bags, neither quite ready for goodbye. "Just 6 more weeks," he reminded her. "Then filming wraps and I'm coming home." Alex touched his face gently. "Home," she repeated with a small smile. "I like the sound of that too." They kissed goodbye amid the bustle of the airport, oblivious to the curious glances from those who recognized Thomas. As he watched her walk toward security, Thomas felt a momentary flash of déjà vu. Another airport, another goodbye, but this one held promise rather than finality. 6 weeks later, Thomas stood in the same airport, this time in the departures area himself. The film had wrapped the day before with a celebration that had gone late into the night. Critical buzz was already building, with industry insiders calling it Scorsese's best work in years and Thomas's performance career-defining. As he waited to board his flight to Los Angeles, Thomas found himself thinking about the strange symmetry of airports in his life, places of transition, of endings and beginnings. It was in an airport that he'd first seen Alex, mistaking her momentarily for the woman he'd lost. It was in airports that they'd said hello and goodbye over these months apart, and it would be in an airport that they would reunite again in just 15 hours. His phone buzzed with a message from Alex. "Safe travels. I'll be waiting." Thomas smiled, typing back. "Looking forward to it. To everything." As he boarded the plane that would carry him back to Los Angeles, Thomas felt a sense of completion, of circles closing, and new ones beginning. New Zealand would always be a significant place in his story, but it was no longer defined solely by loss. Now it held new memories, new growth, new understanding. The plane lifted off, carrying him above the stunning landscape that had been both his crucible and his healing ground. Thomas looked out the window, watching as the mountains and lakes grew smaller below, thinking about the journey that had brought him here and the one that lay ahead. When the plane finally landed in Los Angeles 15 hours later, Thomas felt a familiar nervousness as he made his way through the terminal. The airport was crowded, travelers rushing in all directions, announcements echoing overhead. And then he saw her, waiting by the arrivals gate. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and everything else seemed to fade away. No mistaken identity this time. No ghosts from the past, just two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss, who had chosen to walk forward together into whatever came next. "Welcome home," Alex said as he reached her. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her close in the middle of the bustling airport where their story had begun. "I am home," he replied softly, and for the first time in years he truly was.